Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day or night it is that you are watching or listening to this. I'm Graeme Wood from Rapid Change Hypnosis, and welcome to the next episode of my podcast, Beyond the Couch. And today I am talking to Adam Cox, creator of Hypnotic Wealth. So Adam, just please say hello, introduce yourself, who you are and what you do.
Hi, Graeme. Lovely to be here. My name's Adam. I'm a hypnotherapist, probably most well known for a podcast called The Hypnotist. And it's a podcast I started in early COVID. I think a lot of people had hobbies that they started, lockdown hobbies. And my rationale for having a hypnosis-based podcast is that I was in Harley Street, the rent was high. I knew that there would be not many clients seeing me face to face. So I thought, right, wind that down and then use the podcast as a creative outlet to actually explore hypnosis and create new hypnosis kind of ideas and concepts. So most people know me through the podcast, and the premise is that it's real hypnosis featuring real clients, but you only hear my voice. So I protect the confidentiality of the client, but you actually get to hear the real hypnosis session, and I explain what the issue was that client had. And that's been going for about 6 years now. Just hit 18 million downloads, which kind of boggles my mind that me kind of sat there sharing hypnosis can kind of find a way around the world. And as you said, one of my passions outside of hypnosis is investing and personal finance. And I think it came from a childhood where at the age of about 12 years old, my dad decided to go back to university. So there was a big income drop in the house. And when you're about 12, 13, 14, which was the kind of the age that I was when the income dropped in the house, at that age, particularly for boys, but I think for all, all genders, but for boys of that age, there is a great deal of your worth is linked to things like status, the trainers you wear, the clothes you have, the bag you have, the bike you have, things like that. And because I didn't have that, in my mind at the time, I don't think this way anymore, feelings of low self-worth were linked to lack of financial ability. But because I'm a bit of a problem solver, it made me quite entrepreneurial at that age and think, well, I don't like this. How can I make more money? So I was entrepreneurial quite young. Actually, the big shift for me, though, was in my early 20s. I learned about something called compounding, which is where interest can accrue on interest can accrue on interest. And it blew my mind about how you could create huge amounts of wealth. And it just started a journey of parallel passions, really. I was interested in the freedom that money and business can kind of give a person, while also being obsessively interested in hypnosis. So hypnotic wealth is kind of my two passions fused into one.
So how does that work? How do you work with clients on that?
So generally, most of what I do is working with clients one-to-one. And every time I work with a client, it tends to be a reflection of kind of like what's going on in their world. So over the last few weeks, I've worked with people. There was a guy that works in the music industry. And because when he was a child, his almost the opposite situation to me, his dad became quite financially successful, big house, nice car. And he actually felt embarrassed. He felt ashamed around his friends that he had more and they had less. So for him, he created a belief system that it's not fair or he doesn't deserve to have money. So, fast forward into adulthood and he's very talented, but he's charging a fraction of his worth, always struggling to kind of do things financially. And it's just because there's a belief system that served a purpose in childhood to make him feel included, kind of plays out in adulthood. I've worked with a lot of clients that whenever there's some kind of issue which is undesirable, might be a tax return, might be a debt, might be an awkward conversation around money, they'd rather avoid it. And I think a lot of people will use avoidance as a way to kind of not deal with difficult emotions or things that feel complex. And the problem with that is that quite often you get a short-term reward of that relief of not having to think about it. But particularly when it comes with money, quite often, if there's interest payments, they accumulate. If you fail to make a payment, then there's a penalty. So generally, it can kind of have quite negative consequences, which can increase the stress. So I've worked with people in a lot of debt, and they've got a pile of envelopes with like warnings unopened. They just don't want to. They don't want to know. It's too daunting. So the way I work with people when it comes to money is I've got a good understanding of basic financial principles, like you pay your highest interest debts first. You pay the debts that have kind of bigger consequences, like criminal consequences. If you don't pay your tax, that's very different than if you don't pay a personal loan. But alongside that, my background being a hypnotherapist means that I can look at, well, what's the belief system? What's the coping strategy? What's the emotional trigger linked to that? And that really helps me to kind of play detective and figure out what's actually going. So most of what I do with clients is one-to-one, but I have actually created an online course called Hypnotic Wealth, which takes them through a structure where we delve into what are the debilitating belief systems, what are the fears when it comes to money, what are the inner conflicts. And, you know, it's great speaking to other hypnotherapists, because when we talk about inner conflicts, we know what we're saying. It's there's a person pulling in different directions. There's a part that wants one thing and a part that wants something else. And once you've got that conflict, there's this internal tug of war taking place with people. So the course is kind of like an online program where people watch videos and they actually hear the hypnosis connected to those themes. But like I say, most of what I do is one-to-one with clients, because a course can never know the individual that's right in front of you, whereas one-to-one, you can ask the questions, you can read the facial expressions and the unconscious responses.
All the things that us hypnotists do.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting, because I don't know why, but there always seems to be a stigma attached to money.
Yeah, and you can put it down to kind of, I think hypnosis is way more than just what happens, you know, with a hypnotist. You know, I think a lot of childhood cartoons and Disney, quite often the bad, you know, antagonist tends to be rich. It's like the evil king. It's the, you know, the James Bond villain. They're all, you know, hiding in their volcanoes, but they're billionaires. You know, there is this kind of almost conditioned socialization type of hypnosis throughout most lives, where the connotation is that if you've got money, you're corrupt. You've got no moral compass. If you've got money, then you have to be ruthless. And all of these are based on, not explicitly said, but there's kind of presuppositions that there is something untoward happening there. It links to worthiness. It links to kind of value systems. And at some level, we can all agree on that, you know, that can it really be fair that you've got billionaires that have got so much resources, and you've got literally people through no fault of their own, you know, struggling to have a roof over their heads? Like, most people say that that's fundamentally wrong. But what that can do is it can translate to someone that is not a billionaire, isn't in poverty, and then they don't ask for that promotion because they don't feel like they're worthy of it, or that if they have more money, it's going to come problems. Like, there is this subtle belief system that the more money you have, the more problems. Like a popular proverb or a phrase is, money can't buy you happiness. So there is this thing, well, if it causes problems and it doesn't make you happy anyway, why pursue it? I also think that there is a geographical thing. I think in the UK, there's much more of a tall poppy syndrome than countries like the US, where they, to a larger extent, they celebrate financial success in the States. Whereas in the UK, there is this element of, oh, you think you're better than us, you know, that kind of element. And I think if you grew up that, you know, hearing that on a playground, you know, and that's a, you know, a quite a powerful belief system, then there is this feeling that, well, if you become financially successful, you know, you lose connection with the people that matter, you know, or that somehow you're better than other people. And that's a fear that people have. They don't want to be better than other people. The person I mentioned there that had that experience where their father, you had insecure, 12, 13-year-old boys, that because they had that narrative, oh, you think you're better than us because you've got a better car. Okay. That was their insecurities, but it became a belief system. And the actual belief system isn't that money is bad. It's that thinking you're better than other people because you have money. We could say that's probably not a healthy belief system. And there are some people that really believe that. But again, the mind tends to generalize, and it comes to the conclusion that, okay, well, I don't want to do that because it feels like a deterrent rather than something that's attractive. And I think it comes down to the fundamental belief system that someone has about money. An early belief system that I had when I had that kind of very insecure childhood is that, money would give me more importance or status. And you very quickly learn that that isn't true, but it becomes a powerful motivator if you haven't had any of those things. And then I remember there was it's toys basically, but I remember obsessing, like if I had that yellow Lamborghini that was the soft top, then suddenly I would have made it. And I remember thinking that when I had the money to get that, it would have been the worst decision ever to do. I'm buying a hugely depreciating asset that costs loads to insure and maintain, that could easily be scratched, for what? Just for the approval of strangers. It made no sense. And it was the paradox, really, that when I could afford it, I didn't want it, because actually what I valued more than status was freedom. And I think when you have the connotation that money buys you optionality rather than, it coerces you into being a particular way, actually it can be quite liberating. You can have money and choose not to spend it. A philanthropist is someone that has resources and chooses to give it away. But if you don't have the resource, you don't have the option to decide what you do with that resource. And the more I learned about hypnosis and NLP, the underlying premise that I connected to is that our job as therapists is to help not fix the problem, but to help the client find the resources within themselves to manage that problem and continue to manage that problem and any similar problems in the future. You want to help them become more resourceful. Money's just a resource. It's agnostic. It's not good or bad. It's what you do with the thing. And I think that a lot of people don't believe that. And again, you've got these belief cycles that the beliefs, if you've got certain beliefs that money's bad, if you've got money, you're greedy, it's selfish to have more than you need, you're going to have loads of problems if you have it. It's going to be a very, very powerful post-hypnotic suggestion on yourself that you will self-sabotage certain things that could lead to more wealth, because the desire is to protect and avoid something that could be emotionally painful or undesirable.
I think that's great. You say with those sayings, there's the other one, money is the root of all evil. We're hypnotists, we're hypnotherapists, we know how hypnosis works. The general layperson doesn't. If you ask them what hypnosis is, they're, oh, no, but we're being exposed to it all the time. All the time. If something gets repeated and repeated, we get pulled into that trance, we get pulled into that belief system. I think as a therapist, my job isn't to hypnotize someone, it's to dehypnotize them from that thought belief, that thought process. How much of that is with your clients as well?
Oh, it's massive, because you've got cultural belief systems, you've got childhood belief systems. It's not uncommon, depending on what kind of household you grew up in. But if you grew up in a household where if you saved money, an older sibling or a parent would spend it, you learn very, very quickly, okay, you use it or you lose it. And it's very difficult to arrive to that conclusion when you're 10 and not have the same conclusion when you're 25.
Yeah.
Once it's in there, it's in there. So a lot of people, and horrific figures about the amount of consumer debt that you have in the UK. There are people that their net worth is negative. They have, if you take all their assets less their liabilities, then their net worth is negative, because the car loans, the mortgage, this and that actually means that, they have less than. And so many people are living paycheck to paycheck. And it's kind of like, that would be like living with a sword of Damocles permanently over your head, No wonder there is financial stress and sleepless nights, and people are using alcohol and things. So a lot of the problems that I found that I was working with clients, at some level, maybe not the primary contributing factor, but it kind of, it enhanced it. You know, those people that emotionally eat, if they're worried about losing their job or they're worried about paying a bill, they might emotionally eat a bit more. If someone drinks or smokes or does recreational drugs and they've got money issues, is probably they're gonna use the same coping strategy that they're using. So you've got those things, but it's a very powerful point that you made there, that we have to kind of take the hypnosis off. Because what I try and do when I'm working with a client is, you can give behavioral suggestions, but I always look at them as quite temporary. When you look at belief suggestions, you know that they're a bit more resilient, because when the belief really takes hold, you know, it tends to be self-supporting, and they can have that for a long time. But a lot of the things that you talked about there, like, you know, that biblical quote, money's the root of all evil. Actually, it's not even true. The actual quote is, the love of money is the root of all evil. So it's misappropriated anyway. But if you believe that money is the root of all evil, and you consider yourself a good person, and money's the root of all evil, at some level, the belief system is way more broad than, you know, a suggestion of like, oh, if I see something on sale, I have to buy it, which might be a behavioral suggestion. A belief suggestion is going to be much more prevalent and powerful.
Yeah, I mean, how many of us have got partners that are like, well, I saved 30%. So actually you didn't, because we don't need it, but it's that perceived saving. And you're right as well about, certainly in this country, success is frowned upon in all walks of life. But like, as soon as in sports, as soon as we start to do well, I mean, look at Andy Murray when he won Wimbledon. Not brilliant. So he's a miserable kid, isn't he? We always seem to find something wrong. Whereas in the States, and I've worked over there for a bit, I've been out there quite a bit, it is very much, sometimes to an annoying level to an Englishman, hey, what on, buddy? Brilliant. Yeah. You know, oh, God, you're a bit over the top. But you go to their, especially you go to their American football, baseball, things like that, it's a party and it's a celebration. And when people...
It is. And I think on the entrepreneurial level, it's linked to the American dream. It's this idea of, you know, financial success is inextricably linked to the American dream. It's kind of like, it means that you've come here and you've made a good life for yourself. And there's lots of capitalist connotations to that American dream. Whereas I think there is more martyrdom naturally in the UK culture, that actually it's the person in the pub telling the story of, oh, because of this politician, I lost my job. You know, it's it's more poor me, rather than, you know, I'll find a way to do it. And I found that when I was younger, I learned very quickly to keep my goals and ambitions to myself, because actually a lot of people, for two reasons: either it felt that you were triggering the insecurities in the individual. Oh, don't be ridiculous was quite often the kind of response I would have, or a genuine protection thing. Like, I was 23 years old when I set up my first proper business. And every family member at the time, I thought, oh, they don't believe in me. Actually, they were trying to protect me, because actually they thought what I was doing was risky and reckless. And they're like, oh, but shouldn't you have like a secure job? Like, what happens if you get sick? It came from a place of love and thing, but the overall connotation is, you know, oh, you won't be able to do this. Luckily for me, I had that kind of polarity response. If people say I can't do something, it makes me want to do it even more. So in a way, it kind of worked. It worked to my favor. But actually, some people aren't wired that way. They're looking for permission or approval to have that business, to do that thing. And unfortunately, particularly in the world of entrepreneurship, and when I looked at, you know, one of the sections of Hypnotic Wealth is like, how do you actually have significant wealth? It's very difficult to do it as an employee. If you do it as an employee, you're taxed at a very high rate, particularly as your income goes up. A lot of the power is with the directors or the owner of the company. You don't have any equity in that company unless you might be an exceptionally good lawyer and you become a partner. But generally, employees don't have equity in the company. If you work in a big corporate, even if you do have equity, those share options are a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. It's not really generational wealth. It's difficult to be wealthy as an employee. And therefore, as you've only really got two main strategies. You either become self-employed, which is building your own asset, or you become an investor and you buy your own assets. They're the two main strategies of actually becoming wealthy. But most people, they hear scare stories of, oh, you can't trust the stockbrokers and the investors, they're all scammers, and if you try and set up your own business, you're probably going to fail, and all of this kind of stuff. And there is this kind of connotation of the things that would actually lead to a lot more financial resources and kind of wealth are kind of given the connotation of negativity. It's and even politically, it's becoming this way. It used to be the case that if you wanted to kind of, let's say, a strategy I would say 20 years ago that was quite good for wealth was buy a house and rent it out. Whereas the change in the laws mean that effectively that's not a viable strategy anymore. So a lot of the traditional ways of kind of accumulating wealth have just been kind of poisoned in many ways through policies and disincentives. And what you're left with, I think, is a generation now. I think if I was 20 now rather than approaching 50, I think it would be way more challenging because of the kind of the cultural kind of structure, particularly in the UK. And therefore you've got this kind of almost ever increasing dependency on, you're then depending on companies. And when companies can find AI and robots to replace humans, they will. And I just feel like, for me, wealth is, it serves the main human needs. It can give an element of security because you're not dependent on what other people do around you. It can actually give you a very, very comfortable quality of life. So you get to do the things that you want. But fundamentally, a certain amount of wealth gives you absolute freedom. And everyone knows at least someone who is doing a job they don't particularly like, for a boss they don't respect, living in a house that they never really are there, to impress neighbors that they don't care about. And it's just that whole thing is kind of like you're in this hamster wheel for what? Most of it feels more like a burden and stress than liberation and freedom. And that's why, for me, I'm so passionate about hypnotic wealth, because if you can help people change the belief systems, if you can help alleviate some of those kind of unconscious fears and insecurities and have strategies that are actually kind of viable for them, it's certainly possible to have incredible amounts of wealth. And I think about it generationally. It's each generation, there are more restrictions, but there's also more leveling of the playing field. If I wanted to be an investor 100 years ago, I would have to know stockbrokers on the trading floor, and I would have to have a trading account, and I'd have to know the right families. These days, if someone wants to trade, within a day, you can open a trading account and you can buy equities all around the world, and it's open. The key barrier is not access. It's the limitation of the mind. And if the limitation of the mind is the restriction, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy and you get generational poverty. Most people are going to have a similar kind of net worth to their parents, because they have the similar kind of belief systems as their parents had.
I think that's what with the belief systems. I mean, you say about the trading, there's been so much with these AI traders, these adverts, this AI trader made this much money in a month. Me, as a getting close to 60-year-old, bloody computers, bloody AI, like, I don't think I trust that, don't think I believe it. But like you, I was 23 when I started my own business. And 2 years later, when I was looking to expand it, my dad was like, why don't you just get a proper job? When are you going to get a proper job? Like, this is a proper job because I love it. I love what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Had I have known now what I knew then, I'd never have done it. I think it was my belligerence, my pig-headedness, my stubbornness of, no, I'm going to do this. An opportunity to come in and turn my hobby into a living. So glad I did, because it's opened up another world to me completely. And it got me into, it was a DJing business. So I was a full-time DJ, I was hiring out equipment, I was selling equipment, but it also opened me up into all the other worlds of events and entertainment that I'm in. And from that entertainment came the being a stage hypnosis, doing stage hypnosis, to lying to a company. I said, yeah, of course I do corporate wellness days. When they asked me about it, then Googling to find what they are, went into them, to having a young entrepreneur in front of me in the same situation I was in a long time ago with complete overwhelm. And that's when I realized that hypnotherapy and hypnosis and my experience could help him, which is why I was so interested to talk to you about your Hypnotic Wealth, which is not just entrepreneurs, it's everyday people who are in that situation of.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I found that, the reason why I created Hypnotic Wealth is because there was something more going on than just telling people what to do or how to do it. So for example, I was a recluse and suicidal at the age of 19. That's why I got so interested in hypnosis, because severe social anxiety, couldn't leave my apartment. Luckily and ironically, I was doing a psychology degree that had a 24-hour library. I could kind of learn about this stuff at night to kind of try and fix myself. So I went from like being suicidal. I got a job in a radio station. I learned how to sell. And then I had my own business, and the money I made from my business, I was then buying property. On paper, at the age of 27, I was a millionaire. I had not liquid, but you take assets less liabilities, a net worth over $1 million. And then found out that with properties that had appreciated in value, I could refinance that and then buy more properties and kind of grow. And I had people going up to me and saying, like, how can I do it? Like, how do I make more money? And I would say, right, well, you've got to figure out, your cost of living. You can't grow wealth if you're just making ends meet. You have to have a surplus. So figure out a way to increase your income. You don't want to put everything into assets. So, take half of your extra income to improve your lifestyle and the other half to kind of acquire assets, and find the assets that you're really interested in. At that time, I was interested in property. I wouldn't touch property now. It's a poison chalice, but back then I had a fascination with it. So find an asset that you really like, and that might be tech stocks or it might be commodities, and get to know that. And what I would find is that it would always be followed, but with yeah, but you can't trust those companies. And I've heard that story of like, the fees, and they just like steal all the commissions and all of this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, okay, the fears and the belief systems are absolutely the block. And what I found interesting is that if there were exceptions to the rule, I would hear they probably inherited it. They got lucky. They're one of the lucky ones. And it was all, as hypnotists, we know this, it was all, the locus of control is all extrinsic. And I figured out that actually it was because if they had the belief system that they could be wealthier, it then gave them the responsibility. And the moment you've got these narratives of, nobody makes money and all this, and even if you do, they're just going to tax it and all of this stuff, it gave them permission to not hold themselves up to that kind of level. And a lot of people would rather have the stories of why they're not than actually the belief that they can, because the belief comes with a responsibility to then kind of pursue that. And what you found in your world of business is that it's very different from being entrepreneurial and having the idea and then having the responsibility of actually running a business. You've got staff to pay, you've got corporation tax, you've got obligations to meet, you've got health and safety to like, it's not an easy path, but the goal is not for it to be easy, it's for it to be worthy. And I think a lot of people have already assumed that they're always going to struggle their whole life. And that can be, and often is, a self-fulfilling prophecy that comes with it a lot of mental health baggage that then links to other coping strategies, which again, are detrimental. And I remember I had a vivid memory of a chat with my cousin, and her dad, so my uncle, he was kind of like, he was smoking a lot at the time and he was drinking a lot. And I'm like, why does he do that so much? And he's like, oh, but times are hard. I remember thinking, times are hard, and you're spending money on cigarettes and whiskey. Like, that can't be helping. But now I know better. It's kind of like there was emotional stress linked to money, and that was his coping strategy to resolve it. Whiskey and cigarettes don't solve the problem of money issues. There's other things that do solve that. It's just a coping strategy. And I think a lot of people are dealing with the coping strategies that sometimes make the issue worse. And then they're in this kind of thing that feels like, how do I get out of this catch-22? And that's why I feel like, as hypnotherapists, if we can help clients or kind of educate clients to find a way to break those patterns, then what can be like a horrible life can actually turn into an amazing life. Not because money makes you happy, but money gives you optionality, and the optionality absolutely can decide how you spend your time to give things that equate to happiness and joy and real connection and value.
And you and I have both seen clients in front of us that have life-changing moments with us without actually knowing why, without actually knowing what it was that was causing the problem, which is where I absolutely love hypnotherapy. When someone's in front of me, I don't aim to find what the problem is. Subconsciously, they know it. And as a good hypnotist, I can get them to find it. And a lot of the time, they're still not aware what it was. They just know that burden's lifted, the fog's gone, they can see. Because we are being hypnotized all the time. Is it 1 in 3 businesses fail within the first year, or 50% of businesses self-employed fail in the first year? That's what we...
Yeah, I think it's 50% in the first year, and I think it has a 90% failure rate in the first 5 years. And I remember having a chat with my dad on the beach when I was 14 years old, and he'd followed the script that he was told to, get educated, get a job. He then went back to university, tried to get a better job. He did, and successful in the employment, but never really wealthy, because effectively there was a cultural script, call it broad hypnosis, of you get educated, you get married, you have a family, you own a house. The idea of having more than one house, oh no, that would be risky. The idea of investing in anything outside of a boring pension, that would be risky. So he played it safe. But the problem with playing it safe is that you're limited. And I remember being 13 years old, and it's like, what do you want to do? And it's like, I really want to work for myself. Instantly, it's kind of like, well, 50% of businesses fail in the first year, 90% have failed. And then he was giving me his script for his value system. It's kind of like, well, if you want to run the company, learn about finance, get a degree in accountancy, become the finance director, because the finance director often becomes the managing director. And it's kind of like, that was his script. Yeah. I was like thinking, why do I have to play the rules of climbing a ladder in someone else's entity if I can just build the entity myself? For me, it seemed obvious, and it is obvious. It's just not easy. And but again, it's these kind of things that, if you feel empowered and resourceful, and as hypnotists we can get ourselves in more resourceful states than the average person, then put that to use. It's kind of like, do the things that help you. And I think so many people are terrified or ignorant. There's an analogy I use about, if I'd played Monopoly a lot and you'd never played Monopoly, and I said, let's play Monopoly for money, I'll bet you $1,000 that I can beat you. That would be completely unfair. If you don't know the rules of the game, you don't really know any of the strategies, then basically you're giving your money to me. So, and investing is like playing a game like Monopoly. It's kind of like, you don't want to start putting a lot in to begin with. Like, understand the rules of the game. And when I was very young, you would see things like the FTSE 100 on the news, and you would hear about like share prices, but it was kind of like background noise. But when I was 23 and I got my first ISA, and it was just an index tracker, I remember thinking, like, these things that were always there suddenly started to make more sense. It's like, oh, okay, that's the value of all of those 100 businesses, and it's gone up or it's gone down. And when you play the game, you get the distinctions and the nuances that you can only get by being invested. You can't you can't see these things if you're on the sidelines. You have to be involved. So one of the things that I always encourage clients to do is to kind of play the game rather than observe the game. And that might be £50 a month in an ISA, in just an index tracker, or it might be like a side business alongside their thing, because they're building the neural pathways and they're building the experience of actually being a business owner rather than just an employee, or an investor rather than just a saver. And these things make big differences, because it's very difficult to go from you've been an employee all your life and then suddenly you're self-employed. And I've had conversations, because I think there is too much. There is an ethical component that if you're too positive for your client without assessing their situation, I think that can be disingenuous. And I've had clients that have been employees and they're like, right, do I just quit the job and then, take out some money from my mortgage and set up my own business? A part of me thinks good for you, because like you're actually pursuing that thing. But the other part is, well, you do need to look at mitigating risk. And one of the structures I have in Hypnotic Wealth is the acronym Be Risk Free. And what I do is I help them to think like, the whole point of investing is that, and setting up a business, is that you're taking on some risk, but in return for that risk, you've got the ability to get a return. So, you could have got a job as your dad recommended you to do, but you chose to set up your own business. You're risking your time, your capital, the opportunity cost of what you could do to kind of pursue that. It's much easier, paradoxically, to do that when you're 23 years old than when you're 43 years old and you've got a mortgage and a family and those kind of things, which goes against the cultural narrative. So having experience and having less to lose is actually a way to mitigate risk. And there's a thought experiment when I do the live version. So at the Portuguese hypnosis conference, I'm going to be doing a talk on this. And the very first thing I do when I do the 1 hour immersive experience is I ask people what their favorite time machine movie is. And you tend to get things like Back to the Future and like the Time Machine and all these things. And generally there is a device that people think of when they time travel. It could be the DeLorean, it could be some kind of portal, it could be some, machine or something. But you say, look, if knowing exactly what you know now, you could go back in time 10 or 20 years, just with the knowledge you have now, what could you do to ensure that you're a billionaire when you return to the present? And it forces people to think. It's kind of like, even if they don't know much about the stock market, they probably have heard of brands like Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Nvidia, Tesla. They know that they're big companies now and they didn't really exist, they weren't very big 10, 20 years ago. So it's like, okay, well, you probably would buy some stock in those companies if you knew now what you know and you didn't know it back then. Or you might think, well, I've heard people talk about Bitcoin. I might buy some Bitcoin in 2010 when it was a few pounds rather than, what is it now, 70 grand a Bitcoin. So with the knowledge that you have now, and effectively people come to the conclusion that if you had a time machine, you wouldn't get a 9 to 5 and work really hard and try and impress your boss. What you would do is you would buy assets and you would either build a company in an area that you know is going to be really big, or you would buy assets that you know are going to go up. And why you would do that is that there is zero risk, because you've got an element of certainty as to what's going to happen. So a wealth building strategy is pretty simple. You do the things without having certainty, but in such a way that you can mitigate risk. And that might be things like diversification. It might be things like you have not just diversification of one asset, so you have different tech stocks, but you might have tech stocks, commodities, your own business, and property. And therefore, statistically, your wealth is going to increase because all of those assets over time tend to kind of increase. And if one implodes, and over history, like a company can go to zero, it's unlikely that every company goes to zero. It's unlikely that all property becomes worthless. So therefore, you've got that kind of strategy. So it's about getting them thinking differently about risk so that the fears become manageable, that they actually get experience in what they're doing. And what you find is that once you dehypnotize them to take off all this crap about money and investing, which isn't true, then they start looking at it like, oh, wow, I could do this thing. And, this company, if it gets bigger, I become wealthier. And it takes the mystique and the smoke and mirrors away from something which is very, very simple. Either build or buy assets that are highly likely to appreciate in asset and mitigate your risk in some way. And if you do that, you're more likely to be wealthy. And yet so many people aren't doing that. And it's not because they can't, and it's not because they don't have any financial resources. It is the fears, the belief systems, or is sometimes misconceptions they have, which is just a different form of a belief system.
And I think if we ask anyone watching this now to think of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, those super wealthy people, Steve Jobs, all of those super wealthy people, they've created something that people want, whether you like it or not. Take away their behaviours and their eccentricities and that lot. Would you actually swap place with them now if you had a chance? I bet you'd say yes. But we still slate them. We call them all the names under the sun. Oh, they got all this money, they should do this, that, and the other. You would be in their place. There's still that stigma attached of being wealthy.
And I do think that because those are the most famous kind of billionaires, I think if you ask someone, if you could have the same wealth of a Bill Gates but not be known as Bill Gates, in the same way that if you ask someone, like, if you won the lottery, would you, and you could be anonymous or public, what would you choose? I think most people would choose anonymity, because they value the wealth or the optionality that wealth has, but they also kind of value privacy. The exceptions to that are people that they actually are seeking fame. And there are people, I think the worst quadrant of the matrix is to be famous and poor. I'd much rather be rich and anonymous, and you've got people like Elon Musk, very famous and very wealthy. So there are certain connotations, but what's really interesting is that when Bill Gates is in the Epstein scandals, and when Elon Musk gets political, what tends to happen is that one thing that people don't like about Elon Musk politics, or that Bill Gates was sleeping with prostitutes on an island or whatever it was, then they're like, you see, rich people, billionaires. Exactly. And again, it becomes, and it comes from that cognitive dissonance to say, like, because I'll never have that kind of wealth, therefore, if I can attack that individual, then I feel better about myself. But they're not answering the real question, which is, would they like to have twice the income that they've got right now? Would they like to have the ability to not work for 3 years if they wanted to? That's a very different question. And I think a lot of people would say, no, I wouldn't want to be Elon. I don't think I would want to be Elon Musk. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on that guy's kind of shoulders. Would I like his wealth? Absolutely. But having more wealth for me is more optionality. What you do with it, that's down to the individual.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that was for that point is with your coaching, with your hypnotic wealth, can you separate those two bits? You can separate their personalities from their wealth. You can be like them. You can have what they have, but you don't have to be them. You can still be yourself.
And it's such an important distinction that people miss, and I'll give an extreme example just because he's probably the most hated man on the planet. Epstein, clearly a vile monster, but he clearly was a good networker, and he probably quite a good financier. Okay, but they get all amalgamated. He was a rich evil dude is the conclusion that people get to, and I think the key thing is, and it's a really powerful belief that I think is useful to have, and that is that money amplifies your character, and I think people have a strong belief that money corrupts. That if you've got money, then suddenly you're going to be doing cocaine and you're going to be doing ruthless deals. It's kind of like, no, money amplifies whoever you are. If you're a generous person, money enables you to be more generous. If you're a greedy kind of Scrooge miser, you're probably going to have more money and hoard even more. It amplifies who you are. But I think the kind of people that are interested in hypnotherapy as a way to change generally are pretty good people. there was one guy that called me up that thought he was a psychopath, but generally, people that are kind of wired that way are not curious about kind of hypnosis and kind of self-improvement and those kind of things. Generally, I think there's a lot of people that would have more impact in the world if they felt different about money and wealth. And there's a couple of beliefs that I have, which I think are quite empowering. One is that there's only two ways that you can really kind of make money. One is it's proportionate to the value that you give to the world. So, why would a world famous rock star be wealthier than someone that makes equally talented music in their bedroom? They've created more value for the world. More people have been impacted emotionally by the stuff that they've done. So you can make money by creating value for the world, in which case that's probably a good thing. Or you can create money by taking on risk. The people that bought Bitcoin in 2010 haven't made the world a better place, but they did risk their capital in doing that. And therefore, that's a good way to kind of think. For those people that feel very awkward about having more money, no, it's just a sign. It's the canary in the coal mine to say you've created value for the world, or you've been discerning with your risks. And the one final belief that I'll leave you with before we kind of wind this down is a lot of people are daunted by the idea that if suddenly they are wealthy, they're going to implode and they can't handle it. And the evidence for this for a lot of people are lottery winners that have very moderate incomes, and then overnight, suddenly they've got 50 million in the bank. And generally they don't handle it well. My belief is that the journey prepares you for the destination. That if you are an investor, if you're a business owner, all of those challenges and problems and those difficulties, and no investor gets it right 100%. You're going to make some trades where you lose. You're going to buy some assets that, in hindsight, what was I thinking? Okay, but that's all part of the journey. It gives you a healthy respect for money. It gives you an appreciation of how to mitigate risk and how to be discerning and make decisions. The journey prepares you for the destination, and that's why the self-made millionaires that actually did something to acquire, they don't implode it in the way that lottery winners do, because they've got a healthy respect. The journey did prepare them for the destination. So I think that's a helpful belief to have for people worried about, but if I get rich, I'm going to go crazy and my whole life's going to change. It's like the probability of you getting rich very, very quickly is quite low. But if the journey prepares you for the destination, then you're going to feel that you've earned it, you're worthy of it, and you know how to handle it, because it didn't happen all in one go.
And I think if they've got that drive, that ambition, if people want to be well off, which we all do, we all want to be well off, then just ask yourself before you get that money, what would you do with it? And most people, I think if you woke up tomorrow morning, there's £50 million in your bank, you phone the bank and they went, oh, no, it's not a mistake, it's yours. I think most people's first answer is, oh, well, I'll pay off my friend's mortgage, or I'll pay. Immediately you're thinking about helping other people. You will be the same even when that money is in your account. That what if you're saying now, it will be the same. So if you say, oh, I'll get £50 million, I'm going to become an evil dictator. Well, I hope you don't get the money. But everyone watching this, you're going to want good for people. You want to share that with those you love.
Absolutely. So, yeah, and I think it's an important thing. And I would say anyone listening to this that is kind of curious, because I've done so many kind of hypnosis sessions on money related things. I think I've got at least 5 or 6 money themed downloads that someone could just click a link and get them immediately. And that's me doing hypnosis with real people. I always protect the confidentiality, so you'll never know who I'm working with, but you can get financially themed downloads at the click of a button. So if they're interested, I'll give you the link. You can put it in your show notes, and then that way anyone listening can kind of get those downloads totally free.
Brilliant. Well, we will put all those links down below. Adam Cox, thank you very much for your time. It's been very insightful, and I have to give you a ring one day and sort out my 50p I've got found beyond the sofa. So we can turn that into. So that's Adam Cox, Hypnotic Wealth. He does lots of other things as well, but this is the one thing I really want to talk to you about. So thank you very much for your time. So Graeme Wood, Hypnosis. thank you for watching. See you on the next one. So thank you very much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some use out of it. Please hit the subscribe button down below, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.